can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Richard C. Wilson, and Richard runs FamilyOffices.com and billionaires.com, which we'll go into. Before I formally introduce you, Richard, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. People always ask, like, which one should I check out? I mean, there's so many good ones. Chris Voss was a good one. If someone's listening to Never Split the Difference, he's ex-FBI hostage negotiator. Phenomenal stories in his book. That was a really good one. Along that realm, we had the co-founder of Pixar, Elvie Ray Smith, and he talked about some George Lucas stories, Steve Jobs stories, and just starting Pixar from the beginning. It was fascinating. And Big League Chew, the founder of Big League Chew, talked about how that came about. You know, Richard, it's interesting. A lot of these interviews, it's an overnight success after 20 years, right? And we'll talk about some of these things. That was the only interview I think I've done out of thousands, the Big League Chew, where it was actually literally an overnight success. And part of it was because he licensed it. He licensed it and got a royalty. I think it was a royalty. And so we're going to talk about this because there's a $15 million investor. This kind of relates to that. But he just, everything else, manufacturing, distribute, everything else was handled. And he came up with the idea, and this is like lightning in a he called it lightning in a pouch. That's what he said. So anyways, check out those episodes and more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. We do that in two ways. We help companies launch and run a podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. And we're also an easy button for a company to do corporate gifting. So you give us the list of people you want to, follow up with and keep in touch with, whether it's clients, partners, and we do everything else from there. So for me, Richard, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways on how I can give to my best relationships. And I found no better way by having them on my podcast, featuring them, profiling them, and also sending follow-up gifts to people. Like people, if I send, someone chocolates, they're not like, oh, screw you, Jeremy. But like, usually like, thank you. Hopefully it doesn't melt. We don't send them in the summer to Scottsdale, but, other things that are delicious and the family can enjoy. So if you thought about either of those things, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. I'm excited to introduce Richard C. Wilson. He's got a lot of accolades, but the most impressive thing, he's got 3 girls that he's raising, and he's a husband of over 15 years at this point, a 3rd-generation Eagle Scout, but he owns the #1 website on billionaires, mental models, and scaling strategies. As I mentioned, billionaires.com, has 17 million social media group members. He leads the Family Office Club, the only investor club of 1,000 plus decamillionaires, centimillionaires, and billionaires. It meets monthly in person and via mobile app live stream platform. And Richard, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, appreciate you having me here.
So I just want to start off, we'll kind of talk about family offices and billionaires.com, but start off with familyoffices.com and what you do. And as you do that, I'm going to pull up the website so people can check it out.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah. So I started Family Office Club in 2007. So it was 18 years ago. And I started it because there were no trail guides to help me navigate the family office, which is the ultra wealthy investor space. So since then, we've interviewed, Mark Cuban, Tony Robbins, Mike Tyson, and we've had, hundreds of $1 billion plus family offices on stage. But more importantly, just investors you would never hear about otherwise. They're not the famous ones you'd read in the Wall Street Journal all the time. They're typically people who are well known in their industry, whether it's car washes or dry cleaners or a self-storage platform they sold for $100 million, as one of the speakers we just confirmed recently, for example. And then we put them on stage, we interview them, we create AI tools related to the expertise and knowledge. And we meet every month, 16 times a year. We meet in person to create relationships. And then we have a mobile app that has 1,250 titles in it, essentially, that you can stream, which are all investor interviews, investor workshops, masterminds, summits. And that's what Family Office Club is all about. And just like you, we believe in giving value first. And we've got about, I don't know, 1,100 videos on our YouTube channel, 1 million subscribers there. And we've got the #1 podcast in the family office space as well. So that's kind of what we do in a nutshell over the last 18 years.
Talk about family office. We're at familyoffice.com here. And the membership, how the membership works and what's included. Because I know that you do events, but there's also deals that are going on as well.
Sure. Yeah. So we don't push deals like a fund or SPV. We're not syndicators or cap intro placement agents. What we do is have a community. We find that unless you're raising $1,000 or $10,000 at a time, big checks require big trust, and you have to meet in person and develop that trust over time. And so it organically, through genuine meeting face to face through multiple events over time, you create the best relationships. So we're really, on one side, we have founders who are raising money, and then we have super founders who already have made a lot of money, are liquid, or make 7, 8, 9 figures a year in profits. And the super founders can be mentors to the founders, also investors with them, joint venture partners, et cetera. And so the membership allows you to tap into that platform. And as far as we know, I believe we're the only platform where you can meet with monthly in person, 1,000 plus decamillionaires, centimillionaires, billionaires that are coming to these different events, webinars, et cetera. So that's what the membership's all about. So we've got a few options there if people want to take a look and get involved. We host all of our events in Dallas, Beverly Hills, New York City, in South Florida right now, meaning that we're in all 4 of those places every quarter. So you don't have to fly across the country to come to our events. We're probably in your region, fairly often.
So do people typically join virtually sometimes of those live events, or is it strictly, yeah?
Yeah, we do live stream them as well. So out of the 16 events, most of our members come to 3 to 5 a year. And they'll come to most of them in their region. They'll come to 1 or 2 on the other coast where it's a big investor summit and they don't want to miss. Usually we'll have in a 3-day event, 125 speakers on stage in 3 days. And at a 2-day summit, we'll have 75 speakers on stage. And so it's a great chance for someone to maybe bring their son or daughter or their spouse or a team member sometimes. And so, but usually, 4 to 6 events a year is what most of our members attend out of the 16 because they're busy. We're usually attracting founders who have a serious business and have a dozen or several dozen employees. But we have some early stage groups too that just want to learn and grow their capital network at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you have, you have a lot of free resources on YouTube. I watched a bunch of the videos, are really good. You can check it out. And then obviously you have some other resources here like pitch decks and, other items people can check out as well. I'm curious, Richard, I'm sure this business evolved. Like when you first started compared to now, I'm sure when you first started, you weren't doing 16 events across the country. I'm curious, when you first started it, what was the idea and what did it look like?
Right. When I first started, it was a blog, and the blog was just providing the most helpful insights and information available on the family office industry. So it quickly took off and got 3,000, 5,000, 7,000 hits a day of organic traffic of people reading my blog posts. So we started selling advertising on the blog. We started getting paid for speaking at different events. So I spoke a couple hundred times in 14 countries, and then realized the people hosting the events didn't really know much about the family office space. They were a big media company, or it was like musical chairs, and the head of it didn't really know the industry that well. So then we started, hosting our own cocktail hours, half-day events, full-day events, and then it's evolved since then into, what it is today.
How did you get into this family office arena in the first place?
Well, I had started 7 or 8 businesses before I got out of high school. And then in college, I had a successful business. I had a 9,000 textbook inventory of selling used textbooks online. And then when I got out of college, I got paid a lot of money to do financial risk control consulting. And so it paid for my MBA in cash. And I looked around at age 22 with my MBA And I said, who's going to pay me 100,000 plus a year? Like almost nobody. So I better do something where it's eat what you kill and go into commercial real estate or raising capital. So I went into raising capital and worked for free until the person would pay me to do it, to break into the industry. And then when I was doing that, I said, okay, well, who should I raise capital from? And then I stumbled across one lead who said, oh, I'm a family office. I just work with the ultra wealthy only. And since I was raising capital for a hedge fund at the beginning, I had told myself, like, well, why should I waste the time with anyone else? I should only call on the ultra wealthy. So I could raise a whole bunch of more capital that way. And I found that very hard to do. Nobody wanted to be helpful to me. And the only people writing on the industry in 2006 and 7 were journalists who had never worked a day in their life in the industry. So I said, well, this is backwards. Every other thing I've studied my whole life, there's 400 experts or 50 experts trying to be like the guru of the niche, and no one's being helpful. So just me as like a 20-some-year-old kid, I mean, pretty quickly became one of the more helpful people on the internet when it came to the family office space, and then just took off from there.
There's a couple things, Richard, I find interesting I want to unpack here. Okay. One is you said worked for free. Okay.
Right.
Talk about your approach to that piece and why, right?
Yeah.
I think, Napoleon, I can't remember if it's in Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich or one of the books, he talks about this exact thing as an example. So I'd love to hear what you did.
Yeah. So in college, I picked up the strategy of making my resume look amazing by just offering to do projects that sounded and were really cool for cool companies and just pitched them on like, hey, if I do all this research for free, are you cool with that? And they're like, yeah, sure. And I got my resume to look like amazing, right? And then when I got out of college, I didn't want to take a job making 30,000 a year. So I cold called everybody in the Portland, Oregon Chamber of Commerce, found someone who graduated from Oregon State who was trying to hire people with a CPA designation and 7 years of accounting experience. And I said, no, you should hire me instead. She said, no, I can't. You really have to have the experience. I said, okay, well, I'll work for free. Fire me in the first hour if I suck. I can learn quickly. I'll get this down. And I got it down. And my first year out of school, after graduating early from my undergrad, my professors telling me not to rush, I was making more money than the professors who criticized me the month before and threatened to ban me from the computer lab in the School of Business, which has an entrepreneurship division, because I was trying to start a business in the computer lab. And I was like, I will never donate $1 to you guys because I had to figure out how business got done on my own by experimenting, working for free, putting out lots of lines in the water. And that's just how business goes. And that's what a business school should be promoting, not restricting. So it's really key to like our whole strategy. We call it brute force reciprocation, because it's like you're breaking your way into the industry and creating goodwill. And it's hard for people to say no to, can I help you for free? And then try to do that in 20 different ways. Like something's going to work, you know?
I mean, it's a couple things I think of. It's obviously an irresistible offer, right? Partially
Right.
irresistible offer. And it's also just a give, right? Like, what do they have to lose, right? If,
Right.
again, you present yourself in a professional way, sort of like, I don't want to deal with this person, but I
Right.
like the brute force reciprocation. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. Because reciprocation is all about adding value first, but you aggressively add value first. So when I started my blog, I saw there were 500 keywords people looked for related to raising capital and family offices and family office investors. So the brute force part of adding value first was I wrote 2 blog posts on all 500 of those keywords and put out 1,000 blog posts. And no one else wanted to take that 1,000 ping approach to adding value first. So it's being hyper aggressive at being generous is kind of like the duality that makes it work, you know?
I feel like there's a new book, your next book is like hyper aggressive generosity or something like that.
Right.
Brute force reciprocation. What are some,
Right.
so I love listen, and I love this conversation because I try and live by that and just try and give.
Right.
And, you offer to work for free. What are some other examples throughout in like the blog? What other examples with family offices or billionaires.com
Yeah.
kind of fall into this category?
Oh, so many. So I'll say them pretty quickly. One is in high school, I wanted to learn how to make web pages. And back then, people actually used the yellow pages. So I cold called every computer company in the yellow pages and said, hey, this local 17-year-old, I want to come work with you. I'm happy to do it for free. And I got hired by this Indian fellow who had a software programming business, but he made websites for Indian business owners in his local community. So I ended up learning how to program websites in HTML and Notepad before Front Page and Dreamweaver and WordPress existed. And that's how I developed my web skills. And to this day, it helps me. We have 30 different websites on the internet, and so that's one example. The other one more recently is billionaires.com. It took us 12 years to buy it. To buy it, I've followed up over 170 times via email by snoozing the email every 2 to 4 months and just poking them to death until they caved and gave it to me for half of what they started price wise at it.
What was the reason?
And
Start with the thought behind that. At what point were you like, hey, I want to acquire billionaires.com?
yeah, I bought it in 2023. And I started negotiating for it in 2011. And the thought
Wow.
process was I had already been going on Family Office Club for 4 years and realized the power of positioning myself as a top five or a top three resource in the ultra wealthy niche of family offices. If I could replicate that and be at the center of strategies and mental models for billionaires, it would be powerful. And so I realized that 4 years in, and the vision is, many people like at 800-person conference, they'll say, who's read like 50 or 100 books? And like a lot of people raise their hands. And I said, who's read more than 7 or 8 books from a billionaire, like actually authored by the billionaire? And no hand went up out of 700 or 800 people. And so all of us are basically being convinced by mass media to read books that sound exciting and were marketed hardcore and made the New York Times bestseller list. But why are we reading books from the equivalent of a Duke University basketball player when Michael Jordan has written a book? Like, I don't care how badly it was written and how badly it was marketed. I only want to read the books by billionaires to begin with until I've read all 247 of those. And so basically, part of this is like, I don't care if no one else ever puts value on what we're doing with it, because I know I'm going to get at least one ridiculously smart idea by studying all these billionaires. But I also know that if I outwork everyone in the niche, and I've got like 7 ways that we're doing the brute force approach on this, I can share in a second if you think your audience would care.
Let's
but
do
like,
it. Yeah.
yeah. So like,
This will be part of your book when you come out with it. So we might as well talk about it.
yeah. So like one way is we're interviewing 100 billionaires publicly, and we're sharing the interviews transparently. A lot of people that say, "Oh, I've studied 300 billionaires, and here's what they do." It's like, okay, you studied them? Like, what does that mean? Like, you asked AI to study them for you? I mean, I don't know. It doesn't mean anything these days. So like, we're showing the actual names, the actual interviews. We're doing 100 of them. That's very hard because these people are busy in private. The other thing we're doing is reading all 247 books, either in Audible or reading the actual book, not a book summary, that billionaires have authored, and we're ranking them. And we've got the top 10 books ranked. I've read 120 of them. As I get through all 247, then we'll rank the top 50 or so. We've
Are
then
they on
found
here now?
if you go to billionaires.com/books, then you can see the top 10 that we like the best.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
We've also found that there are 60 infographics on billionaires, and those are linked at the top of the website there. And then we've also found that on YouTube, there are 986 billionaire talks on YouTube publicly available. So what we did is we took the time to transcribe all 986 talks. And then we fed them into an AI, a custom AI tool, so that you can bounce your strategies, your challenges, and your plans against the collective wisdom of what every billionaire has said on YouTube. And basically get coaching from the collective wisdom of billionaires. And so when we do our in-person events, our summits, we try to have 2 billionaire fireside chats or strategy sessions at each of those events, and have them in person at the event as well. So that's an example of like, we're doing so many things that if we keep up at this pace, it'll be hard to catch up with how deep we went down the billionaire rabbit hole. Obviously, Forbes has put out stuff on them forever, and Bloomberg puts out a ton of stuff on billionaires, but our goal is to be number one long-term and be top three, if we're not already, in terms of like the number one source, because Bloomberg covers a bunch of stuff and so does Forbes. But billionaires.com is dedicated to just going super deep down this rabbit hole of billionaire scaling strategies, mental models, mindset, et cetera.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was such a big ramble.
No, this is great. Because I was going to ask, because I know in the videos I watch, you do talk about different tools and software and specifically books, and I took notes on that, but this is great. So people can check out billionaires.com/books. We can see the top 10 here, and it's kind of what I'm thinking about. I know you have three daughters, I have two, and one of the things I want to do with them, right now in this point in time, my oldest is going to be a freshman in high school, and I'm like, listen, this is the best education you can get, like these type of books. And so I said, I'll see what you think of this, but I said, listen, I'm going to give you my curriculum. Okay.
Right.
My curriculum, and it's going to be like 14 books a year.
Right.
And if you finish all, you'll get paid for each one you finish. And if you finish all 14, you're going to get paid like a lump sum, even more.
Right.
So I'm thinking of what should be in the curriculum. And so I'm going to check these out. Like, so I'm curious for
Sure.
your daughters, what you would include. So I have, so far, she's read How to Win Friends and Influence People teen.
Okay.
There was like a teen girl version of How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Okay.
The Four Agreements is on that list. Eighty
Okay.
20 sale. I want 80/20. Like, I think it's a foundation. You mentioned that with like kind of when you discover this family office, like, why would I go after 99% when this 1% will allow me to raise the funds? So I want something on 80/20. 80/20 sales and
Right.
marketing by Perry Marshall is a good one. Richard Koch has some 80/20 books as well. So that's going to be on the
Right.
list, but I'm curious what's on, and I'm going to look at this. Like, I love 0 to 1. I've listened to Sam Zell's Am I Being Too Subtle? Some of these other
Yep.
ones I have not listened to. So I'm going to have to check out what would be on your list for your
Sure.
daughters.
Yeah, so I just sent you what's on my list on the chat function
Oh,
here
cool.
on Zoom. It's a Dropbox link to a Word document. And what I tell my daughters, we talk about this often.
Can I bring it? Can I show this live or
Yeah,
no?
yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
okay,
Go
cool.
for it.
Okay.
So, what I tell them is that if you know our family values, which are at the top of that Word document, and you live by those, and if you, we read the Arnold Be Useful book together. And
Hmm.
so I summarized it in this Word document. And then every year we read the Success Principles by Jack Canfield book together. And I summarized those here.
Nice.
I told them that, like, don't believe anything that anyone says to you in your life that doesn't ring true to you. And don't believe your teachers or any authority figure too much. But if you live by our family values and you can live by everything on this one piece of paper here, then you're going to be amazingly successful and you'll be in the top 0.1%. Because I think the combination between these three sources is so comprehensive and powerful that it doesn't make it seem too overwhelming. At the same time, exactly what you said, reading maybe the top 100 out of 247 billionaire books might be more realistic for most people than trying to read all 247. It's taken me a couple of years so far to get to 120. But yeah, totally agree with everything you're saying. Like making sure your kids are groomed to be thinking differently than most people.
So we have the Success Principles by Jack Canfield on here, and the Be Useful by Arnold Schwarzenegger. What else? Any others that you'd be like, okay, for
I
kids,
mean,
preteen
those are the
kids.
two that I'm
Yeah.
I'm most focused on. But I talked to them about negotiations. I talked to them about the logo I was creating this morning for this deep due diligence investors kind of subgroup that we're building out. Like I talked to them about gross revenue royalty, investments, et cetera. So, but as they get older, my oldest one's only 12. Then I'll probably introduce some more of these books. But right now, I'm just trying to get it really deep in their brain, like the success principles, Arnold stuff, and our values, because knowing that cold is like a foundation. And then other stuff on top of it could be architecture on which way they want to build up.
I saw, I know you did an interview with Tony Robbins. You mentioned Mark Cuban. Um, which interview sticks out? I seen you've interviewed Jeff Hoffman. He was a keynote at one of your events as well. Which person sticks out that, I mean, maybe a piece of advice that you remember from gleaning from them?
Yeah, I think that the two that immediately come to mind was Jeff Hoffman. Speaking to him, he talked about figuring out what motivates your team And in one case, what motivated one of his managing directors is that their mom lived in a trailer park still currently and never lived in a house, but always sacrificed things to make things work for them as a kid. So his goal was to buy her a house one day. So he said, okay, over the next 7 years, let's build this division. If you work your butt off and do this, we'll go and buy your mom a house. And so they did that. The person worked way harder than if they had just given them a raise or a bonus, et cetera. And so he likes to motivate people that way. Larry Connor is a real estate billionaire, and he said 90% of problems are people problems, and 90% of opportunities are people opportunities. And I've seen that thread, pretty commonly. And then Tony Robbins said that proximity is power. So he made $400 million off of one transaction just by being around the right people. And that's my point with Family Office Club. I see it as a perpetual learning machine, selfishly for myself and anyone who comes to our events. So you're learning from the smartest people in business, but also if you study the mindsets of centimillionaires and billionaires and you read all these books, it's just good quality input for your brain. And like you're just going to be thinking higher level thoughts, not be thinking small. So that's why I do that. I think it's just fun to play with that type of stuff.
I'm fascinated by the evolution, right? Because even what Google started is not what they ended up being. And so it
Right.
started really as this idea to provide content, and that kind of gained traction. Then sold advertising. What was the next kind of piece that I don't know when the events, maybe the next key pivotal moment, maybe when you started events for it, or what was next after that?
Yeah, next we started our data division. So we have family office databases. So we will sell like a lead list of family offices that exist in certain countries or have certain investment interests or a list of angel investors. And so that took off before the events.
Hmm.
And then when the events started taking off, we were selling event tickets. So we were selling tickets for $2,500 or for $1,400. And then our revenue would go way up and then like way down, go way up and way down. And we had no portal. And what really was the next turning point for our company is doing more of a membership model because now the quality of our room is much higher. If you're not a member, you can't come to our events. You can't just come
You
for
can't
a,
pay separately. You have to be a member.
yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta be a member because we don't, it's really about building relationships and people who aren't dedicated to the space are just not going to do well. So otherwise you have someone coming in and they're in a stressed out 3 week raise and they got to raise $3 million or their partners will be upset with them and they're coming in and trying to hard pitch everyone. And then it's kind of like people don't even want to, like, the more high stressed, anxious, rushed, high pressure you are, the less anyone wants to invest in anything you're doing, right? Like the person who's successful and has great momentum and is in demand, there's a feeling of like, oh, it's something super valuable and I'm passionate about it. So I'm excited to tell you about it if you want to hear, but I'm also not trying to twist your arm and get you to invest by today at 4 p.m. Like I just met you, right? And like, even if you're in the market to buy a Mercedes or a Rolex or a vacuum and you're going to the airport to go to Scottsdale for a long weekend and someone's like, hey, I got this Rolex. You want to buy it? You might be like, who are you? Like, what's the context here? Like,
Right.
no, I don't want to. Not from you. It's like, so that's really key to our space, I think.
Yeah, I was on a early date with my wife in a place of Chicago. It was a ping pong bar, but it was in this like really
That's
sketchy
cool.
area. And literally a guy walked in the bar with, and he opened his coat and had like, he had like stuff on. So that's what I picture. He had like
Yeah.
watches or whatever. We're like, no, we're good. You know,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah,
no
yeah, yeah. Even
trust.
if you're in the market for that exact thing, it's kind of like the context matters more than the content. So, like, another way to say it is who refers the deal to you might matter more than the merits of the deal. And Robert Cialdini has scientifically shown that it's proven that the relationship matters a multitude more than the merits of a deal. And they've also shown that meeting in person makes it 16 times more likely for you to close any transaction. So imagine if you're selecting a wife, buying a house, investing $500,000. Do you think you want to meet in person? For sure. Way more than buying a Rolex. So it's way more than 16 times more effective to meet in person if you're raising capital, looking for a joint venture, looking to allocate your money, than trying to do stuff online using some sharp AI tool. There's definitely a lot of uses for AI, but it can't replace a meeting in person.
Richard, I know, you don't do this alone. You have a team behind you, and you mentioned Jeff Hoffman about motivating the team. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
a little bit about the team and maybe some of the key hires, not people wise, but like position wise that you put in place to run the family office club and also billionaires.com.
Sure. Well, one key thing is that there's a lot of investor clubs out there, but a lot of them don't host much in terms of in-person events. A lot of them just have a local 30-person angel investor meeting or an annual event with several hundred people. One of our unique edges is we've brought on a lot of talent and we spend a lot on payroll for event management talent. So we're hosting these 16 in-person events per year. The other side is really technology. We have 17 million social media followers and group members, and we have 6 full-time people on that in that division that are constantly helping us tweak our digital presence, our web portal, our mobile app, et cetera. I think those are the two big edges. I think we're the best marketers in the world in the family office space and very well positioned that way. We have more thought leadership out than all of our competitors combined that I know of. And I think that those are the most important makeups of the team is having just really sharp people on the event management side and then on the tech marketing side. And then the rest of it is the mentality of our people. So we want to have people who on the sales side are on a moderate salary. So they're respected, but really are unhappy if sales are going poorly. And they're very happy when sales are going well. So we're both unhappy at the same time if we hit a speed bump. So we're both leaning forward saying, how do we fix this? And that's essential. I think that you need to be overly generous when things are amazing, but slightly harsh when they're not. So you're both feeling some pain. If the salesperson gets such a salary, they're never really in pain. They're kind of good either way. You're sunk. You're like, it's not going to go well,
I want to walk through, you've seen some pretty in help facilitate on a variety of levels certain deals. And so I want to walk through a few. The one I mentioned in the very beginning, which was the $15 million in the medical space investor, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So this was a brother sister came to me. They sold a business in the healthcare space for $15 million. And we do some of our investments into medical and dental practices. And we had a group with 4 locations in the dental space, doing about 15 million a year in revenue. And they were looking for capital. So I invested myself and we structured a gross revenue royalty transaction where the investors get their money back off the top line revenue and they get a multiple on their money. Sometimes we structure those with a kicker on the end, et cetera. And we've done about a dozen or a dozen and a half of those deals now. And we took them from finding that deal, finding 3 or 4 other deals to get it closed. But the important takeaway for investors is that, consider gross revenue royalties, but also consider if you made your money in a niche and you've spent decades of your life in it, overinvest a little bit in that niche because you can conduct better due diligence, have more high conviction. And if you haven't made your money in the niche, find someone who's spent 30,000 hours in it, show them the deal first, and they may ask to invest in it if it's amazing, because they may see the value right on the surface, but they'll also ask questions you would never know to ask. Like, oh, well, how are you coding this for medical reimbursement? Or what's your percentage of Medicaid out of your total revenue? Or, like stuff that like these little nuanced questions that pinpoint key issues. And so it's really important to bring in investors like that. And that's how I de-risk deals, but also sometimes close transactions. Is I look for that person who spent 30 years in the niche and maybe they want to take half the deal or the whole deal and invest with me.
I've heard some of your some of your videos, and you have some interesting ways of structuring deals. Specifically, you talked about de-risk. And I know I don't remember the scenario, but it was kind of, you said we pay back all the investors. I don't get paid until all the investors get paid back, and then I'm paid back. If you want to talk a little bit about why and how you structure these things.
Yeah, sure. So there's several ways to de-risk deals, and the very first one is to always see if there's some way to have some sort of collateral in the deal. So many times I've been asked to invest in something. We say, well, okay, we're flying a little bit naked. If this whole thing collapsed, is there any medical equipment that's free and clear? Is there any real estate? Are there medical receivables, insurance receivables rolling in every 60 days? And try to have half or all of your investment backed by some sort of collateral so you're not totally wiped out if things go poorly. Just by asking, which is usually free to do if you do it in a polite way, many times you can get some sort of collateral behind your investment. So that's one strategy that hopefully anyone could go out and use. But I think what you're referring to is that we've structured deals in all different ways with royalties to make the other side comfortable. So with one transaction, we've acquired more single word domain names in the medical space than anyone else. So we own neurologist.com, dermatologist.com, parasitologist.com, obstetricians.com, et cetera. And the search volume for these terms has gone up anywhere between 30 and 100+% in the last 5 years as digital assets grow in value and more people look online for who's the best dermatologist in their area, et cetera. And when we got that deal done, I had invested a couple $100,000. So I went to one investor who said yes to our deal because of the structure. And I feel like investors don't realize how important it is to structure a deal well. And people raising capital think, oh, I just need to get in front of the right investors. It's like, yeah, but you mess it up every single pitch if your structure is horrible. And if it's average, it's just sitting there on the shelf. You want your structure sweating for you, not just sitting there. And so this is a structure that sweat for us. And we basically said, hey, we put our couple $100,000 in. As we get equity stakes and flip out of these domain names and get strategic equity in people who want the best Fifth Avenue real estate online for dermatology or neurology, et cetera, as we get that, you get all your money back first, and then we get our money back, and then we're pro rata going forward. So let's say we only get 300,000 back. If they put in 300,000 and I put in 200,000, I lose all of my money and I'm bald and they don't get a haircut at all. They're not touched. And so it shows them that like, hey, if this thing gets messed up, it was my fault. This is my idea and I'm running the ship. So if we run aground and poke a hole in the boat, then shame on me and I should bleed before you bleed, et cetera, and win after you win. And the lesson there is that investors should win at the same time. Ideally, they should be de-risked first and then they win a bit before the person who may be structured or is running the deal. So I think that's like super critical. And so many investors, even if they're worth $100 million, they don't think about structure. They don't know how to structure deals. They just have no experience in it.
What's also interesting about that, Richard, is that you are invested alongside with them, right? So they're like, okay, this person trusts, because you could structure it and it's just you're getting the investment, but they're like, oh, this guy's putting his hard-earned money in this deal as well, right? So
yeah,
obviously
for sure.
There's something there too.
Yeah. And a lot of people will say, oh yeah, I've got skin in the game. And like almost everyone will say that. It's so popular to say if anyone's read a book on capital raising, like, oh, you got to have skin in the game. But a lot of time it's fake skin in the game. So you have to watch out for that as an investor. Somebody might be syndicating a deal and be like, oh yeah, I've got skin in the game. I'm putting up 10% of the money. But it's like, are they really? Because if you've got a deal, and let's say it's a big deal, $100 million, and they're using 70% debt, so you only need 30 million equity to buy this $100 million deal, well, then that means that 10% of that 30 million of equity is they're putting in $3 million, which sounds pretty good. But if their asset management fee is 2% on the full value of the asset, they're getting $2 million in year one just from the asset management fee. They might have an acquisition fee of 1 or 2%, a financing fee of 1 or 2%. They might have negative risk on day one, right? So it's sometimes fake skin in the game you have to watch out for, because then they're really just trying to trick you.
Another one that we were talking about before we hit record was $150 million family, and what happened there?
Yeah, so that family came to us, did not have a family office. They had watched like all of our videos on YouTube. We've got this free mini series called How to Start a Family Office mini series. We give away some of our most powerful strategies, and they had watched all of that. So the 60-some-year-old father came to me and said, hey, my son's in his 20s. He wants to start running our family office. I'm a little timid about it. How do we train him? How do we find opportunities through you? So we started showing them the best of the best of what we see within our club and setting them up with little 5-minute meetings when they came to our events. And they've allocated to several 7-figure deals. But importantly, in one of the deals, unexpected things happened. No fraud, but had to work out of a unexpected like permitting entitlement situation. And we are able to de-risk the deal 100%, get all of their capital out of the deal and reallocate it into a different deal just by working out terms with the capital provider. And it was really a win-win for both parties. And they didn't get wiped out or damaged at all or lose any money on that deal. But importantly, it was about the father and the son being comfortable with how do we look at deals as a family. And many times they brought me one deal I won't forget because it was a hard money lending deal. And they said, oh, this deal looks great. We're thinking of putting $1 million in it. The returns are 6% and it's backed in first position by real estate. And I said, well, do not do that deal because the whole world is getting 9 to 13 or 15% in first position on real estate. So whoever's showing you that deal is keeping a huge amount and probably charging you fees on top of keeping a huge amount of that spread. And you can find multi-billion dollar institutional groups that'll pay out 7, 8, 9% plus. So 6%, probably not the best to go with that group. So that's just a quick case study example of sometimes how we help investors.
I've heard various explanations on what a family office is. Can you
Right.
just tell people how do you, when things family office, how do you define a family office?
Sure. Part of the confusion comes from the fact that there's three types of them, but a family office is really a investment slash wealth management solution for the ultra wealthy. So if you're worth $500,000 and you make a mistake and you file a tax return late or don't complete great due diligence on one of your 10 investments, you might lose $50,000 on one of those 10 investments, or you might get pinged by the IRS on a $2,000 penalty at worst. But if you're worth 5 million, penalties are worse. If you're worth 50 million, now it's $100,000 mistake. On one of those little mistakes is at least $100,000 mistake oftentimes. And that would have paid for a full-time team to watch out for you, play better offense, play defense, file regulatory paperwork. I have 36 LLCs. Some of my clients have 130 LLCs. And when you have dozens or thousands of employees, you're more likely to make a mistake, and every mistake is likely to cost you much, much more. So that's why you need a holistic solution when it comes to family offices.
Yeah, and it puts other things at risk as well, I imagine.
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's something that people usually realize the hard way, just after like a deal going bad or just realizing they're doing dumb deals and not knowing how to structure them or not knowing they can negotiate on the fees, et cetera.
There was another, we're talking about brute force reciprocation for a second. A billionaire that you ended up doing some work with. Talk about that journey a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. We first got introduced through a member of our club. They came to one of our events. A year later, came to another one. We kept in touch, tried to ask them what they're looking for, how to add value to them. And it took 6 years of them coming to 3 or 4 events, and then following us on social media. And then they came in and we got our first deal done after 6 years of working together. We've since closed 19 transactions with this billionaire and his team. And we continue to, been to his house 20 times and continue to discuss how to work together further. But it took half a decade. So sometimes we have deals come together and 3 to 6 weeks later, end up doing something together. Most of the time, it's more like, 3 to 4 months or 3 to 8 months, or it could be 3 to 8 years. And you have to be fine with that. Like if you're in the space and you only care about people that can invest with you in the next 3 days or 3 weeks, people will feel and smell that stench of stress and anxiety, and they'll just back off and not want to work with you at all sometimes. If there's a genuine deadline, you'd be like, hey, we've got a little bit of a short fuse on this deal, but there's a way to say that politely, professionally, and be like, this is probably not a fit for you because, I just met you, Jeremy, but, we do this deal closing in 3 weeks. In case you hear someone that maybe has some money that they really want to put to work short term, but this is what we're doing. This is what makes us unique. And in a single sentence, you need to tell them what's compelling, high conviction, unique about your value add process. If you can't do that in a sentence, then for the busiest of people, it's going to be tough to position yourself.
I'm gonna bring up the this site here again, which is billionaires.com. We're on the books page. I'd love to hear what you've experienced firsthand from billionaires, maybe how they think, or some learnings from that that's maybe changed your belief system or what you do.
Yeah. I think one of the most common ones, which you think about it, is relatively base for the definition of what a billionaire is. But I think one of the most common ones that's powerful is rejecting when anybody starts to say, well, this is how it works in our industry, or that's not realistic. This is the norm. Or, well, everybody does it this way, so we should do that. When the ultra wealthy hear that are worth 50, 100 million plus, especially at the billionaire level, there is some cases where, yes, you have to have a mobile app. That is like table stakes to play the game. But in many, many cases, having to do things because everyone else does it, means you'll be average by definition. So when people told them, no, that's impossible, they would lean forward and say, well, maybe that is the way to go then, because everyone thinks it's impossible. And if I could pull it off, I'd be solving a huge problem. And some of them instantly reject and are frustrated by the closed-mindedness of people taking no for an answer, or people that laughed in their face. And this is a very common thing that it's retrained and rewired my brain a bit. I was just talking to even one of our team members about recruiting someone who once did some consulting work for us, as like a very small, easy example of how I see this day to day. Even with people on my own team, where I said, hey, maybe we're going to try to hire that person and bring them onto our team. And the response was, oh, no, they're not available. They've been working at this other team for a year. It's like, well, that doesn't mean anything. We can still hire them to our team, you know? And it's just like this closed-mindedness of like, everybody is doing this. I must follow the herd, or like, oh, I don't know if that's possible. It's like, you have to break out of that and not be held back by other people's limiting beliefs and thoughts and norms and standards and all that stuff, and throw all that out the window and lean forward on things that people say is impossible or not practical, et cetera. And just focus on things that are exciting and that will move the needle.
You know, Richard, I'm on this page. So I have one last question, which is the books page. And this is ranked, by the way, in order of what Richard, this is an Amazon rank. This is actually what Richard got the most value out of in order, right? So I know after this, I'm going to go through the ones that are not in my Audible. I'm going to go add to my Audible. Not on this list, because I know there's other ones. What's one or two others that is not in this top 10 list that people should definitely check out, and also talk about your book for a second as well?
Yeah, sure. I think the number one that I can't recommend enough is Arnold's Be Useful. He just goes over 6 principles, and the book is not only like comical and funny to read in some parts. My kids loved it. I just skipped over a couple of the swear words that were in there when they came up when I was reading out loud, obviously. And studying that book and reading it multiple times, I think was pure gold. And then on that last page you showed, everything is available on Audible except for the Warren Buffett annual reports for the last 60 years. That one you have to buy the big thick book. You might have to buy it used on eBay or Amazon if you can't find it new in print anymore. But those are two of the most powerful. David Rubenstein has several books out there, and I recommend checking out his different books, because he has a style of interviewing other leaders who are often billionaires, but he is a billionaire himself too. So it's a unique dynamic. It's almost like if Tony Robbins had a billionaire interview series or something. So those would be a couple of the kind of footnotes of extra ones to check out, I think.
Yeah. First of all, Richard, I want to thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey, your knowledge, your lessons, your stories. This is fascinating. I want to encourage everyone to check out familyoffices.com. There's a lot of free resources they have on their YouTube channel. They have them. You could check them out on familyoffices.com too. And if you're interested in, actually joining their events and becoming a member, there's a link there. Also check out billionaires.com. There's a lot of amazing free resources there. Richard, thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate you having me here.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like $100 grand.